What can be said about Star Wars A New Hope that hasn't been said before? How many different times can it be stated how George Lucas's films have changed pop culture, the movie business, most of our lives, the whole shebang? It's hard to think of a movie and the franchise it spawned that's been picked over, analyzed, dissected more than Star Wars, and yet, here we are. So why go over such familiar territory again? Maybe it's because the Star Wars films, and we're talking about the original trilogy here, capture our imagination in ways no other movies can. Better movies have been made, yes, but how many of them transport us so vividly into another universe, one that's so foreign and yet so familiar? Star Wars puts a smile on the faces of those who love it, and that's probably why we keep revisiting it over and over again. Like a great song you can listen to on repeat, there's just no getting tired of the things that bring joy to your heart. We all have our favorites in the trilogy, and plenty of people will argue that the sequel, The Empire Strikes Back, is the superior overall film, while some will always stick up rigorously for the flawed but boisterous Return of the Jedi. But there will always be a special place in the heart for the one that started it all. A movie that no matter how many times you've seen it, still feels as vibrant and innovative as it did a couple dozen viewings ago. A movie that might actually be perfect, though it can be argued that too much tinkering by its creator has lessened some of its original greatness. But to A New Hope's credit, even those special editions and their largely unnecessary alterations haven't truly diluted the quality of the film. No matter what, A New Hope remains a bona fide classic, and no amount of cosmetic updates can change that. Well, one can hope, so brace yourself for a jump into hyperspace with the sci-fi monolith that started it all, here on Revisited.
So unnecessary.
Many of us can't remember the first time we saw A New Hope. It's just always been there. It might as well have been playing in the background when we were born. Those of you lucky enough to have seen A New Hope in theater upon its initial release will no doubt have zero trouble recollecting that day. For the rest of us, it's been like an omnipresent fixture in our lives. When you're young, you enjoy movies based on superficial elements, the colors, the sounds, the actions, the glorious eventfulness of it all. As we get a little more mature, we peer deeper past the razzle-dazzle, searching for more substantial pleasures, story, character, drama. Star Wars is the wonderful melding of those shiny, superficial, and dramatic elements, a glorious marriage of style and substance where imaginative storytelling and mind-blowing technical efficiency combine for an experience that still feels like pure magic. It's the ultra-rare movie where every button pushed seems right, every manipulation is expertly accomplished. It wows us with its ideas, seemingly inventing an entirely new genre, even as the stories it tells are older than us, inspired as they are by serials, legends, and science fiction tales from, well, a long time ago. Outer space will always be the ultimate playground, and A New Hope tells us early and often that it'll show us the stars like nothing has before. We're thrust into an intimidating scenario where a ship is pursued by an almost comically larger battleship, and we instinctively know which one is housing the good guys. 5 minutes into the movie, and we see this will be a David and Goliath story, the underdogs against the favorites, persistent good versus all-consuming evil. The appearance of Darth Vader solidifies this. He is darkness personified, a malevolent presence that will loom over everything else in the movie. Of course, now we know all about Darth Vader's complicated, and some might say unneeded backstory, but in A New Hope, he's just a deadly force to be reckoned with. The very clear menace of Darth Vader is contrasted by the boyish impetuousness of Luke Skywalker, our protagonist, who will take the tried and true hero's journey from nobody to savior. Luke has a destiny that calls to him, and of course, he answers, even while being woefully unprepared for what it will reveal to him and take out of him. He's got the arrogance of youth on his side, though the wide-eyed look of wonder and surprise he sports throughout the film betrays that he really is just a kid, way out of his element. But it wouldn't be as much fun if we had a self-assured lead who knew exactly what he was doing the entire time, now would it? Luke can't take the journey alone, so in the tradition of all great adventure stories, he's gifted with a team, one that quickly evolves into an unlikely and somewhat dysfunctional family. There's the wise older man, the mentor who knows the secrets of the world he's bringing the foolish boy into. There's the affable sidekicks, comic relief, who bumble noisily from one dangerous scenario to the next, and who, against all odds, indeed prove to be a productive and crucial members of the family time and time again. Of course, there is a love interest or sorts, and let's remember here that we're just talking about the first film, you guys. And she's got as much heart and courage as anyone else. She's a princess, yes, but she's a rebel at heart, a beauty with an acid tongue who stares down the bad guys and seems to know better than anyone that evil can never triumph over good, at least not for long.
Your friend is quite a mercenary. I wonder if he really cares about anything. Or anybody.
And then there's the rogue. The confident bad boy who has all the answers, at least so he thinks. His name is Han Solo. And before you know it, he'll be the prototype for dozens upon dozens of smart aleck scoundrels in movies, television, and literature for decades to come. Naturally, the glint of mischief in his eye and his overall aura of detachment hides a heart of gold and the soul of a fighter. And the fact that he values something bigger than himself will not surprise the audience, but it might well surprise him. The introduction of Han and his tough-as-nails right-hand man, our Wookiee, Chewbacca, is a crucial one in the film. Up until now, the story has moved us with its earnestness and innocence. Yes, it's been funny, and it's also shown us some surprisingly grim things. But it has kept up the veneer of a brighter-than-usual family film. But here, the movie announces it's going to surprise us some more, setting us in a spaceport apparently housing some very scummy and villainous characters. A New Hope brings a brand new vibe to the proceedings, a playfulness that immediately cements the film as the ultimate crowd pleaser. The Mos Eisley Cantina and its population of drunken, chatty aliens completely open up the world of the movie. We perhaps knew we'd be seeing some fantastical sights in the film, and aliens almost certainly were on the menu, but George Lucas shrewdly tosses us into something bizarre and wholly familiar. The local watering hole, but filled with creatures we could have never dreamt of. Wouldn't you know it, they act just like us. Rebel-rousing, laughing, picking fights for no reason. The scene had been imitated 1,000 times since, but never better. You just can't beat the initial surprise, and even if you've seen the movie more times than you can count at this point, you still look forward to this gem of a sequence with childlike anticipation. Even more impressive is the fact that Lucas doesn't overstay his welcome here, though we feel as if we could spend the rest of the film's running time in the cantina. We're only there for a few splendid minutes. Then we're moving along.
Move along. Move along.
Back to Han Solo for a minute. We just met the guy, and at first it's a minor character. He's gonna help our friends out and be done with it, but suddenly, we're immersed in his story. The main plot is shoved aside for a moment to focus on the pilot's dilemma. Something about a gangster he owes money to. When we see this guy kill a henchman in cold blood, yes, we're talking about that version.
Yeah, I shot you first, you green son of a bitch!
And quite suddenly, we're seeing a new side to this film. We're invested in this rogue now, and we find ourselves grateful at the prospect of a rough-edged, cynical mercenary and his growling partner joining our kindly protagonists on their journey. The introduction of Han and the Cantina sequence at large says to us that this movie isn't just about old sorcerers, cute robots, and naive young heroes. This movie has a bit of a smirk on its face, a swagger. Han's macho cockiness and the events in the cantina signal definitively that this movie isn't just for kids. Everyone's gonna love it. They simply have no choice in the matter.
You've taken your first step into a larger world.
Like most movie classics, A New Hope features a cast that is virtually irreplaceable, with each actor perfectly inhabiting their role in such a way that it's unimaginable to picture anyone else doing the job. It surely helped that the three leads were more or less unknown at the time, bringing no baggage with them. Mark Hamill, fresh-faced and looking ready for anything. Carrie Fisher, opulent yet fiery. Harrison Ford, ruggedly handsome and all too aware of the fact. They aren't playing these characters, they are these characters. It's no wonder people are still protective of them after all these years. Naturally, an old hand or two can't hurt, which is why the casting of Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan Kenobi is so important. Here's a character who should feel familiar to us, welcoming. When he first removes his cloak, it's something close to a sigh of relief to see the gifted actor's face as it's revealed. His unforgettable voice and the actor's pleasant demeanor sells us on some of the mumbo-jumbo the old wizard is going on about. This is a man you can trust. On the other side, you have the imposing voice of James Earl Jones's Darth Vader, calmly, coolly making demands and predictions terrifying an entire galaxy. Could Darth Vader possibly sound any other way? No, surely not. And the human face of the evil empire is a cleverly cast Peter Cushing, veteran of seemingly hundreds of old British horror thrillers, another familiar face in an unfamiliar world, and yes, another great voice. Never underestimate the importance of an actor with a rigid command of the language.
Evacuate? In our moment of triumph? I think you overestimate their chances.
On a technical level, there was never anything like A New Hope before it, and to this day, you have to marvel at what they accomplished in 1977. The movie flawlessly integrates so many eye-popping spaceships and space stations into its tapestry that they cease to be special effects. They're just there. When the great Millennium Falcon goes into hyperdrive, you're buying every second of its launch. The confidence on display in the filmmaking is so assured, it's any wonder a lot of people, Lucas included, were convinced the movie wouldn't perform well. George received a lot of grief over the myriad of changes he made to his original films, and you might say some of that was well-deserved, but we can never forget just how in tune he was with his audience when he made this picture. Few directors have broken down our defenses with more skill than George Lucas did with his original space opera. One element that can't be ignored and was almost certain to succeed right from the get-go is the beautiful score by John Williams. Now iconic, it showcases the importance of a good score in a film. It's impossible to separate it from the movie and vice versa, and combined with his score for Jaws 2 years prior, it solidified Williams as the premier composer of Hollywood blockbusters, perhaps for all time. But for all its technical prowess, A New Hope shines so bright thanks to its humanity and the recognizable emotions from a man, alien, and machine alike. The big moments deserve the reverence they receive from the audience, such as Han coming to save Luke at the end and Luke seeing Obi-Wan struck down. But sometimes it's the clever little details and sight gags that truly earn our gratitude. The chess game with Chewie, the stormtrooper saying, "Open the blast doors, open the blast doors." Yes, this is a movie that always feels alive. It's not content to be just another distraction from your world. It wants to bring you into its own and show you the time of your life. So what can be said about A New Hope that hasn't been said before? Maybe nothing. This wasn't an attempt to shed new light on it. This was just another appreciation of a great work of art by some fans who are indebted to Lucas and his incredible collaborators. More than anything, it's a movie you can count on, and not unlike its characters who are true believers, we find it heartening to know
The Force will be with you. Always.
So until next time here on JoBlo Revisited, may the Force be with you. So, where were we?
The Force will be with you. Always.
In 1980, when The Empire Strikes Back was released, Star Wars A New Hope had already established itself as the most popular movie ever made. Beloved by practically every person who saw it, firmly ensconced in pop culture conversation forever, the film lit up the imaginations of children and adults alike, and that's what made it so special. Very quickly, it went from modestly budgeted gamble to an industry game changer, with everything from highly coveted toys to a rather bizarre Christmas special, capitalizing off the goodwill generated by George Lucas's terrific film. The actors were now stars, and their characters were celebrities. Star Wars was the feel-good story of the business, helping to usher in a newfound appreciation and soon enough, a reliance on high-concept summer blockbusters. But a showstopper of this magnitude needs an encore. For all the merchandise and souvenirs offered in the wake of A New Hope's footprint, only a sequel could truly fill the void felt by people who'd seen the movie a half a dozen times or more. And if you stand back and really look at it, A New Hope has the perfect Hollywood ending. In short, good triumphs over evil. Our conquering heroes are treated like the noble champions they are. Everyone lives happily ever after. If the movie had been a gigantic flop, a non-starter, this would have been a very satisfying finale. But as we know, that was never meant to be the end, ideal as it may be. Our heroes have only made the first step in what will continue to be a journey filled with tests, hardships, and more than a few significant surprises. The battle is over, but the war is not. The New Hope must find out just how heavy that crown weighs, here on Revisited. Naturally, anyone paying attention to the end of Chapter 4 realizes there can be no meaningful celebration even as things end simply perfectly for the good guys. The dreaded Death Star has been obliterated, shocking the Empire and placing a great big feather in the rebellion's cap, but Darth Vader narrowly escaped, himself rather stunned by how thoroughly they've underestimated the rebellion and their invaluable new allies. Watching him fly off in the aftermath of the Death Star's explosion, you walk out of the movie elated, but cautiously so. Darth may have initially seemed like the imposing right-hand man of autocratic wretch Grand Moff Tarkin, but everyone could suspect that he was much more than a superior henchman. Darth seemed very much a person, if that's what he was, who wasn't used to being belittled or beaten, and here these scrappy nobodies have literally blown up everything he'd been working toward. Most likely, there would be repercussions. The second chapter must see our friends taken down a peg. That much can be assumed. Just how far can't be expected, but the harsh truth is, if they're indeed going to win the war, they're not going to be flying as high as they were at the end of the first chapter. The title surely hints at what's in store. The Empire Strikes Back. Simple and informative. Now, it's a title we know as well as any other, but when it was announced a couple of years ahead of its debut, it must have sounded a bit strange, almost informal in its directness. It sounds like a description of the movie, not the title. Obviously, in retrospect, it works perfectly as both. This is the Dark One. The irresistible joyousness of A New Hope peeks through here and there, but from its opening scenes, Empire announces that it will be slightly grimmer, a little more serious, even harrowing. An unconventional war picture where we're reminded that the enemy is bigger than just one imposing space station. You'd think blowing up the Death Star would have eradicated most of the Galactic Empire, but you'd be dead wrong, and this chapter shows us what our heroes are really up against. George Lucas and his writers Lawrence Kasdan and Lee Brackett have devised a sequel that truly raises the stakes, which sees our old friends constantly on their heels and beleaguered by enemies. Concurrently, the film brilliantly builds on the mystical ideas introduced in the first. We start to understand, if only a little, the power and importance of the Force, the dark side and the light, and what it takes to be a Jedi. If these notions seemed a little juvenile or fantastical in the first film, they take on a much greater weight in Empire, elevating the film out of the simple realm of sci-fi fantasy and onto a level that's truly epic, seemingly creating a genre all on its own. Lucas and his collaborators are going to make us buy into the Force, the Jedi, the whole awesome struggle of it all, and we will be wrapped with attention throughout. Our heroes aren't living it up when we reunite with them. Quite the contrary. The film is admirable in the way that it wastes no time depicting them as good soldiers in the trenches. We learn the Empire is relentlessly searching the galaxy for the pesky rebels in their base. So eager are they to wipe them out once and for all. Once they stage their first attack, our heroes are split up for just about the rest of the picture. In fact, they're very rarely in the same space at the same time at all. Without each other, they're more vulnerable, and the more the movie throws at them in their respective storylines, the more it's clear that they're all the better off for having found each other in the first place. This is just great storytelling and world building happening simultaneously while director Irving Kershner throws marvelous sights and sounds at us at an exceedingly rapid pace. Not unlike A New Hope, Empire impresses to this day with its ability to titillate with moments we've seen dozens of times before. The introduction of the massive AT-AT walkers, so ominous in the distance, then so startling and terrifying when seen up close. The whole Hoth battle is still such an exciting action sequence to behold, even while you think, boy, they should just tie the legs together every time. There's the white-knuckle chase through the asteroid field where John Williams' music has never been more thrilling, followed by that harrowing escape from the gigantic Exogorth or space slug. What a splendid revelation that is. The introduction of Lando, whose charm offensive is a sight to behold even for Han. Darth Vader showing up for dinner with a special guest, and the ensuing sequence of heartbreak and horror as Han is put on ice in front of his best friend and his woman. Faced with impending doom, Han maintains his cool perfectly.
I love you.
We know.
What a third act this movie has. Lando's arc alone is a roller coaster, from shady old chum to betrayer to unlikely ally, all in the span of minutes. Everything considered, Lando doesn't even have all that much screen time in Empire, and yet, in the end, he's an integral part of this whole saga.
You'll find Han. I promise.
And then there's the scene, the moment that we all know is coming, and thanks to the brilliance of the filmmaking, has lost none of its power. Where were you when you found out Darth Vader is Luke's wayward dad? It's one of those things we've just always known, yet the devastation on Luke's face is still so powerful. And the moment when he decides he'd rather trust a bottomless oblivion over his own father is an exhilarating crusher. Even that brief flash of humanity we see in Darth as his arm drops in disappointment as he watches his son fall has a touch of sadness in it. This iconic scene is what so many movies and TV shows have been attempting to replicate in various shapes and forms in the decades since. It's one hell of a set piece. But Luke lives, of course, saved by Leia and Lando, a new chapter of his story opened by the biggest shock yet of his life. The farm boy is definitely now a man, and more than that, he's a Jedi. The weight of the galaxy on his shoulders, now he must defeat the Empire and his father. What an unexpected coming of age this has been. If the first film was a marvel of ingenuity in front of and behind the camera, the sequel raises its game considerably. The late, great Roger Ebert called Empire, upon its 1997 re-release, a visual extravaganza from beginning to end, one of the most visionary and inventive of all films. He's not wrong. So technically assured and visually engaging is the movie that not even 1997, the special edition, had much to improve upon. It can be argued Cloud City is a bit spiffier and the added CGI is mostly inoffensive, and a little more Wampa goes a long way. But if we're talking perfect movies that need no alterations, Empire is one of them. And to be sure, the movie's greatest special effect needed no updates. Yoda, Luke's new mentor and perhaps the most crucial figure to enter his life thus far, is a remarkable achievement, a flesh and blood character who brings just as much charisma to the screen as any of his human counterparts. A minute or two with Yoda and you're convinced he's alive.
Adventure. Excitement. A Jedi craves not these things.
The fact that he takes the opportunity to mess with Luke during their initial meeting, leading the kid on with a bit of a ruse, makes him instantly relatable, which is necessary before we find out just how powerful and omniscient he is. Empire's Dagobah sequences immerses us in the sorcery of the story as well as the darkness. It's very fitting that Luke must learn about the Force and himself in such a grimy and miserable setting. The truth is not pretty in this scenario. Luke has seen darkness before, he's lost people before, and he thinks that might prepare him for what's ahead. He's not afraid. You know what? He will be. As he must, Luke chooses to save his surrogate family in lieu of finishing his training, still the impulsive kid in many ways. That's the way it has to be. He still has some mistakes to make. This is Mark Hamill's best performance in all the Star Wars films, as we see the innocence of Luke slowly but surely fade out. The severity of the hard choices the character must make are noticeable on Hamill's face at all times. I'd go out on a limb to say Hamill's performances in all three of the original Star Wars movies are seriously underrated. It must sound like the movie is pure intensity and drama throughout, but it's not. There has to be humor in the Star Wars universe, and Empire finds humor in some odd places. Darth Vader, it turns out, has a flair for the theatrical, killing subordinates when they displease him with very little effort in front of disbelieving onlookers. The dynamic between C-3PO and Han is really set in stone here, and though we love C-3PO and R2's forever friendship, the Bronze Protocol droid's greatest foil is that surly space pirate. And does Harrison Ford ever further establish Han as one of the great characters in the movies? No notes, no commentary, just a continuation of one of the most perfect marriages of actor and character in cinema. But Han wouldn't be Han without Leia, and Leia and Han are meant to be together, are in fact perfect for each other. The princess's stubborn refusal to let the scoundrel woo her, even as her affection is as plain as day, royalty and retrobate linked together forever. Who can resist? Leia is the pragmatic heroine Han and the movie needs. Her determination to fight for the cause, always evident. These two, with their will they or won't they back and forth, are the true heart of the original trilogy, a match made in a galaxy far, far away. Let's take a moment to appreciate Carrie Fisher's energetic performance, because she really is an undeniable pleasure to watch in scene after scene.
Stuck up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder.
The film ends on a cliffhanger, one of the great cliffhangers in the movies. Unlike the first one, Empire gives us the absolute promise of another chapter, and how could it not? Far from the victorious celebration in the throne room, our heroes are bruised and battered, slightly adrift, but surely not out of the fight. We know that Chewie and Lando will track down Boba Fett and Han, though what that will look like, we cannot yet guess. We also know Luke must fully confront his father, as well as the formidable, barely seen enigma known as the Emperor, who might end up being the most daunting challenge yet. What other eye-popping surprises and delights exist out there will be eagerly awaited. As John Williams' Rebel Fleet music swells, so does your heart, because you've just been privy to a genuinely monumental work. Every cylinder in this engine has been in lockstep, resulting in a masterpiece. Is it the best of the original three? This writer thinks so, though cases can be made for the other two, and sometimes it depends on the day. But Empire is just about as flawless an example of Hollywood myth-making as there can be. Star Wars: A New Hope was itself a miracle. Following it up with an even better movie? Odds were against it. But then again,
Never tell me the odds.
one of the great things about the movies we love is that they continue to evolve the more we watch them. You may notice details you hadn't before, perhaps certain elements that flew under the radar in previous viewings now stand out more. The more you know the sights and sounds of the picture, the more you can quote the dialogue as the characters say it, the closer your relationship with it becomes. That relationship can change over time, too. Movies that you still hold affection for might seem a little off, a little dated, not quite as remarkable as they once were. The rose-covered glasses might slide down just a little. You still love the movie, but not in the same way you once did. Of course, all this preamble is my way of revisiting Return of the Jedi. The final film in George Lucas's ambitious Star Wars trilogy, Jedi, is surely the most hotly debated of the original trio, the one where fans, especially fans of different generations, might finally diverge. No one is likely to argue that A New Hope is just wonderful, an excellent way to kick off such an ambitious series of movies, and Empire is routinely in the discussion of the greatest films ever, which I wouldn't argue with for a second. But Jedi isn't a perfect movie, even as it does contain plenty of magnificent moments and indeed works as a satisfying capper to Lucas's masterful trilogy. For this writer, it was the greatest thing ever for a little while. In my early days as a budding film fanatic, you couldn't get me to watch a movie more than I had watched Jedi. I wore out all the Star Wars movies as a child, but Jedi was my favorite, and what's not to like about it when you're, say, 6 or 7 years old? Monsters, space battles, seemingly limitless action. The movie has it all. But when you get a little older and your relationship with the movie evolves, you can't help but notice that the wondrous elements you clung to as a little kid may not hold up quite as well under the gaze of a more discerning eye. So what does Return of the Jedi look like to an adult who, yes, has seen it dozens of times, but attempts to view it with fresh eyes as best he can? Is it still as thrilling and infectious as it was 30 plus years ago, or is it, as Dante and Clerks infamously put it,
all Jedi had was a bunch of Muppets?
To be fair, Return of the Jedi has a very tough act to follow. Not only is Empire Strikes Back a superb film, it has one of the most memorable third acts ever. Add to that the pressure of pleasing the masses with the finale of a tremendously successful franchise, and Jedi has a lot on its shoulders. Everybody in the world now knows Darth Vader is Luke's father. Luke's had his hand chopped off, Han's been abducted so he could finally pay his debt to Jabba the Hutt, and Lando and Chewie are in hot pursuit to rescue their friend. How will Lucas and his co-writer Lawrence Kasdan and director Richard Marquand wrap it all up? Well, the first matter of business is getting Han back, which brings our protagonist back to Tatooine, where it all began. Han's paying his debt by decorating the wall of Jabba's palace, and the hapless C-3PO and R2-D2 are on the scene to set things in motion. Meeting Jabba is quite the spectacle, and his den of iniquity is something we haven't really seen in Star Wars before. We've been to the Cantina, of course, but that looks like Studio 54 compared to Jabba's unpleasant abode, filled as it is with an assortment of odd and ugly creatures whose only purpose appears to be standing in thrall of their slug-like dictator, occasionally chortling at his morbid sense of humor and wondering if they're going to survive the night. Jabba's palace is an unseemingly place, all right, and I don't mind telling you that this writer was freaked out by the whole creepy atmosphere at the tender age of 3. At least that's the story my mom always told me, and it's still rather creepy, a word you don't necessarily associate with the Star Wars pictures. Jabba himself is a gloriously grotesque creation, and as a character, he's disgusting yet utterly fascinating. As was the case with Yoda and Empire, we instinctively know Jabba is a puppet, the culmination of countless hours of ingenious hard work by the whiz kids at Industrial Light and Magic. But he's also immediately convincing because his personality shines through so clearly right off the bat. We register that he's fearsome and gluttonous, pleased as punch with himself and the nasty menagerie he's constructed. While not likely to hurt you on his own physically, his very presence is so intimidating that you know any number of his brain-dead groupies would be willing to kill for him just to gain his favor. That he's a perv and a sadist comes as no surprise. That lecherous expression on his face says it all. Even as we're grossed out by him, we're just as drawn to him as the rest of the weirdos in there. How often is it that we can delight in a character so distasteful? The first act of Jedi is like its own mini-movie. Plot-wise, it simply serves as a means to get Han back into the fold, but it allows Lucas to indulge in his own playful dark side, where he introduces us to some nasty sideshow horrors like the merciless Rancor and the truly upsetting Sarlacc pit, which, by the way, looked more disturbing pre-special editions. The Jabba section of the movie only lasts roughly half an hour, but the Star Wars series taking a break from the stormtroopers and talk of rebellion to treat us to this freaky visual feast is absolutely appreciated. After Jabba and Rogue's gallery are extinguished, Jedi gets back to the more serious business of wrapping up all loose ends. A thoroughly haunted Luke Skywalker must now confront his father and the Emperor with a little pit stop along the way to see his dying mentor, Yoda, who informs Luke he's got a sister, and it's Leia. As if this guy didn't have enough going on. But he takes the news pretty well, considering... If there's a major complaint to be lodged against Jedi, it's that so much of the second half of the movie feels like one scene of exposition after the next. Characters come together to share details of their plans, and there's precious little time for the fun back and forth that made the first two films more than just standard science fiction. After Jabba's demise, Jedi feels a bit like it's business first, wonderment second. Not that the movie doesn't have fun in mind for its audience. In fact, it's preparing to introduce us to an entirely new species of creature for us to revel in, hopefully fall in love with, and eventually purchase likenesses of. Jedi sends us to the critical moon of Endor, where the Empire has set up an energy shield to protect its second Death Star. Naturally, the rebels have to destroy this shield. Unbeknownst to them, they're going to get a lot of help in that regard, whether they like it or not. The Ewoks arrive as if out of a different movie altogether. Furry, goofy, adorable, yet incorrigible, the fluffy mischief makers immediately come across as the most manipulative of Lucas's many creations. You can picture them lining the toy store shelves, but how much of a service are they going to be to the story? As it happens, they're quite integral, as our heroes would be woefully incapable of completing their quest without them. So yes, they're useful from a narrative perspective, but there's no denying they feel at odds with most everything else that's happened in the movies, save for the brief appearances of the Jawas. Lucas has stated in the years since that Star Wars movies were always aimed specifically towards children, but that thought is very far away in the midst of the grand, fun-for-all-ages adventure of New Hope and Empire. It does feel perfectly clear while watching the bouncy, chittering Ewoks. However, they now remain a final example of something that works well enough when you're just a kid, but feels out of place and distracting when you're an adult. Still, without them, we wouldn't have John Williams' classic Parade of the Ewoks theme, which is so wonderful that you have no choice but to smile whenever you hear it. To Jedi's credit, it has so much going on in its second half that the Ewoks are only a part of it. The movie relentlessly slings us around as several crucial set pieces are happening. The Ewoks and the Rebels battling the Empire on Endor, the Rebel Alliance's battle amongst the stars led by Lando and Admiral Akbar, which is especially breathtaking to watch, and the somber meeting between Luke, Darth Vader, and the Emperor. While the bouncing back and forth between these monumental sequences can be a bit jarring, there's no question Markind and his team have filled things to the brim with so much action and high-stakes drama that you're fully on edge during Jedi's final act. The Battle of Wills in the Emperor's throne room is no doubt the most pivotal and memorable thing happening during the movie's busy end stretch. Luke attempting to deal with his father on human terms while the Emperor pokes and prods at the two of them is a very fine drama indeed, and the Emperor himself is a great villain, especially considering his screen time isn't even all that plentiful. Insidious, patronizing, and colder than ice, he weaponizes anger and self-doubt like an evil puppeteer. And you, for once, see how Darth Vader could become such a ruthless bastard under his tutelage. A hat tip must be given to Ian McDiarmid for his stellar performance. Peering creepily under his hood with demonic eyes, McDiarmid nails every aspect of the character, from his evil laugh to the condescending manner in which he addresses those around him, even the way he hits those consonants in the Emperor's carefully chosen statements. They've created a truly distinctive bad guy for the ages with them. It's a standout performance in a movie that needs one. While we're not going to agree with Dante on his remark,
Muppets.
the characters who make the biggest impressions in the film are indeed all cleverly crafted aliens and one incredibly evil sorcerer. That's no diss on the acting from our returning stars, but the truth is Luke, Leia, and Han aren't quite as entertaining as they were in the first films. While Mark Hamill does everything he's supposed to do, Luke is certainly a bummer, and even as we're rooting for him, his glum, humorless demeanor makes one yearn for that gung-ho kid that was so magnetic in New Hope and Empire. Obviously, we recognize he's got the weight of the entire galaxy on his shoulders, with having to topple an empire and confront his father and all, but this solemn version of the character simply isn't very enjoyable to watch, however necessary that portrayal may be. Han and Leia feel more like supporting characters than they did in the first 2 rounds, and they're more on the same page as they've ever been. The spark that made their will they, won't they romance so infectious is missed. We'll always be fans of these two, but it can't be ignored that the magic between them is gone a bit, and they're mostly relegated to helping move the plot along as opposed to standing out as the remarkably engaging characters that made us love them. Again, the actors are doing their part, so you can't blame them. Although you can't help but catch a little secondhand embarrassment watching the great Harrison Ford interact with those screwy teddy bears. Whereas the narratives of the first 2 films felt like they sped forward with momentum created by impulsive decisions, happy and unhappy accidents, and just pure destiny, Jedi's story ultimately feels manufactured or preordained. Perhaps that's inevitable with the final film in a trilogy like this. After all, the bad guys must lose. The good guys must accomplish all of their goals and breathe a long sigh of relief. The audience must walk out happy that their time invested in this years-long journey has been well spent, and Jedi does those things, and you can't argue that the film doesn't pack a ton into its swift 130-minute runtime.
You were right about me.
If it's the least astounding in the original trilogy, perhaps that's just more a testament to the undeniable excellence of the first 2, as they literally brought us into a galaxy unlike any we've seen before and populated it with characters and events both charmingly familiar and refreshingly original. Jedi carries the burden of being perhaps the most predictable of the 3, just a bit of that enchantment having worn off. But tell that to the little kid who watches it with eyes wide open, consuming with glee everything from Jabba's palace to the wild chases on Endor to the dire events in the Emperor's throne room. That little kid actually still exists somewhere in this writer, and hopefully in you too, which is why Jedi's faults feel rather minor when you're in the moment. Don't be afraid to slide those rose-colored glasses back up as Lucas tosses the kitchen sink your way, because there's still so much to appreciate here. The Force is still strong with this one, and it always will be.